Earth's, let me zoom in a little bit, orbital path right here, the green, and
Right.
this red is planet 7X, and they just miss each other maybe by an hour or so. Earth is traveling forward speed is about 8.4 Earth diameters for every hour. So this starts about 24 to 28 hours before it ever reaches this here point. Earth is entering deeper and deeper, and within 24 to 28 hours, Earth comes to a complete stop, and you have 12 hours of extended light. Okay, exactly like the story of Joshua says. Then, roughly 2 to 3 hours later, you have a meteor shower. It says in the storyline of Joshua that the meteors took out more of his enemy than they did with a sword, or they called it fiery hail, which is meteors. That's the terminology that they would use. They didn't have modern words. They had to use their own. They have their own misidentifiers. And
In the Bible, it would be like fire rain out of the sky, wouldn't it?
correct. They give a. You have to understand that the biblical was written in an ancient language, and they could only use animal, mineral, plants, that type of stuff to use as a description. Even if it was something that wasn't that, they used it at, it was like, so they call it fiery hail, and that's the closest thing that they could come up with. There's no way, in other words, that they could have guessed this by accident.
Well, that brings me to another point I'd like to discuss about like the floods and stuff and Noah days and Jonah and all of those things go right into Planet X.
Yep.
Would you tell everybody how they work together?
Yes. I will show you just the overall quickly. This is a timeline of all of the events that I found in the Bible and also ancient text that supports this. And this is the same model that we're using, the same overlay from the Chinese, and as well as the events where NASA sent the probes. All of the data is matching this, let me see, elliptical pattern of 150 days crossing, coming in at the end of August and exiting around March. The first event right here is Noah's flood. Then you have 333 years later, you have the Tower of Babel, where the top was burnt and the base was sunken into the sand, which is caused by liquefaction during the quake. And during the same time, Lot at this and Sodom and Gomorrah was wiped out during this event. They were in two different regions and two different countries. Then 223 years later, you have the event of Joseph. Joseph, we know now the actual year, date, and even hour that the event happened because of an object called the Niebuhr disk, which we can talk about later. 275 years later was the Exodus, where they had 3 hours of darkness. And that was because Ceres was destroyed prior to the arrival of it. That slowed the forward speed of the planet by 1/20th of its normal speed. Instead of causing 3 hours of darkness, it caused 3 days of darkness then. And you can follow the sequence of events for the next several weeks that matches what this object would cause. Then 47 years later, because it was traveling so slow, it didn't have enough speed to go into deep space. So it turned around in a short path and came back in about 47 years, which was Joshua's long day. Then 150 days later, 150 years later was Job's trouble and the drought of Ruth. Then 290 years later was King David and Saul. There was a 7-year drought there. There was 3.5-year drought at the end of Saul's reign, 3.5-year drought at the beginning of David's reign. And then it reaches very near to normal orbit at 358 years. This was the time of Hezekiah. This was Jonah of Nineveh, where he gave a 40-day warning to him before destruction. Hezekiah, where the sun went backwards on actual steps of a stair, because the earth tilted. And then the destruction of a massive army, which was outside of Jerusalem gates later in the evening, of 185,000, which there's outside text that they said that they were destroyed by fiery hail. Okay. Then there's Haggai when the second temple was being built. Then we have, after that, we have Yeshua's sacrifice, where there was 3 hours of darkness. You can't have an eclipse of the sun during a full moon. It takes a new moon, and Passover is on a full moon. This automatically defines a third object. The text says the whole earth was darkened, as well as outside text that says that also. So you had to have a third object many times larger to cause the whole earth to go dark. And 284 years later, it was the star that Constantine saw coming out from around the sun. This was Planet X as it rounded the sun. And about 395 years later was pretty much the destruction of the Mayans. It was a massive drought where about 90% of their population died. Then we have the Chinese records in 1054. Then we go into the Dark Ages, where the black plagues happen. But there's a problem with the data whenever we're talking about the black plague. Yes, in certain regions they did have the black plague, but in other regions it's impossible, because the black plague, the virus cannot tolerate cold weather or cold regions. And the black plague is recorded to go all the way to Greenland. That's impossible. This the dust trail from this comet has been known, just like in biblical time during Exodus, to cause sickness and boils on animal as well as people. And the black plague is also described as that, similar. And then it brings us all the way to our present time in 2016, where the book of Revelation gives a very accurate account that follows the same pattern and model. There's nothing that breaks the model as far as their description. CO6 is the first meteor shower in March, and 5 months later is the second event, which is CO7.
Well, Gill, I've heard some people say they think that maybe this is wormwood. I'm asking you, do you think this is wormwood, or is this not wormwood?
No, wormwood is a description. If you look at a large meteorite like this in a museum, this is an iron meteorite. What sort of description would you call it if you didn't have the word meteorite in your vocabulary?
It looks like a piece of wormed wood, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. This particular meteorite is like around 15.6 tons in weight. The meteor that made the Gulf of Mexico, according to my estimates, is about 110 miles across. The Gulf of Mexico is the largest meteor crater. That was what ended Noah's flood. That it's ejected about 71% of our top crust, and that top crust is exactly the mass and the volume of our moon. And then the water receded into that void, and then what was left was called Pangea, and then those continents separated, and that's where we are today. This planet is not wormwood. Wormwood is a meteor following it in the debris field. It says it's as large as a fiery mountain. So you're looking at something several miles across. In other words, that's going to hit the Earth. It says every wall is cracked, every island and mountain is moved. That means the continents are moving. The Earth will wobble like a drunkard, like a hut in the wind. For primitive man to give that type of destruction, I'd say that's pretty, right on as far as the model. It's not violating a model. It's not violating our present knowledge of what we know.
Do you have any pictures of the shadow where where it seems to be that Lot's wife was turned into vaporized? Do you have any snapshots of that?
Sure. Let me find that.
And
Oh,
folks, this was all from Planet X.
let me give you a quick view of the Gulf of Mexico whenever we
Okay.
let me reverse the time frame here. You can see where the Africa and South America fit. You can see where the Yucatan went back down, and that would be the crater rim. You can look off of Florida and see a double rim, which is one of the hallmarks of a massive crater. The Gulf of Mexico
Wow.
depth is actually deeper than the average depth of the Atlantic, and a Gulf region is not supposed to have that. It's supposed to be shallower. Okay, and
Wow, this just makes so much sense. I'm in awe, man, because that crater fit from that asteroid impact. That crater fit perfect for the Gulf to
yeah,
separate.
and the only way that we can have a crater of that size, what I've done is what I call as a logic triangle. One cannot exist without the other. A large impact where the meteor is about 110 miles across and making a crater about 1100 miles, there's two levels of energy associated with it. One is the blast and one is the frequency that it emits, where all carbon molecules will spontaneously combust. So all life form, plant life, animal life, humans, would simply be incinerated because of the frequency. But that frequency is canceled out if the earth is flooded. And therefore, the only way that you can have a moon from an impact, as it says, because if the impact would have hit Earth as a molten state, then the moon would have a core, and it doesn't. The moon does not have a magnetic field. It has gravity, but no magnetic field. It doesn't have a core. And the volume is equal to the volume of our oceans, where the crust used to be. And if you put the moon back on Earth, you get a flooded Earth. And the only way that you can have a meteor size of this size and still have life is for the heat to be canceled out, and that could only be through a flooded Earth.
And North and South America is going to get canceled out because of they're not going to be able to grow all this new GMO food. Is that right?
Yeah, in the Bible, he's pretty serious about what he says. He says you're not allowed to create new life forms. GMO crops he says that he's going to destroy 1/3 of the grass, the trees. Later, he says rivers. But that's describing continental crust. Well, if you look at the Earth as a globe, there's the only half of the globe that has 1/3 of the continental crust on it is North and South America, and only North and South America allows GMO crops to be grown. We'll ship grain as GMO overseas, but the crops are not allowed to grow over there. It's only here. So once you burn the GMO crops, they can't reproduce because it doesn't make viable seeds. You were asking earlier about Lot's wife, and if you follow the story, there was two towns that were destroyed. After she heard the first blast, then she went back around the wall to look at the cities, which they were warned not to do. Then the second blast happened, and I would believe that she was vaporized, similar to like in Nagasaki. You can see the shadows here of people that are left on the cement and areas here, and it's
Gill,
a
can you make that a little bigger, Gill? Will it get any
sure.
bigger?
It's the description of people and what they saw. You know, that they're saying that God turned it to a pillar of salt or stone, but it's what they saw. They saw her outline on the rock. It's not God saying that I was going to turn it into a stone. It's people's description of the aftermath and what they saw. It's the same thing if an ancient person they knew a man was standing here and that was a ladder, the only description that they could have can, because vaporization was not in their